Good evening and welcome. This is Jeremy Murphy. I am a running coach. I am a Move It Monday ambassador. I blog at runninggrooveshark.com. I can be found on Twitter at Jeremy P. Murphy. And I'd like to talk to you tonight about tapering tips in preparing for a race. Part of running and preparing for a race is knowing how much to taper and when to taper and how to taper properly in order to ensure peak performance. And tapering is difficult. It's some have called it an art. Some have called it a science. Some have called it pure frustration. I think it's fair to call it all of the above. And we all have our stories where tapering has worked and not worked, and we adjust accordingly. Sometimes we have to adjust our tapering plan based on how we feel, injuries, illness, things of that nature. So I did post a blog post today about tapering, and that is on the in the comments there. It's called Snowy Tapering Tips. There's a link there for that. There's also a helpful link for a tapering article by Greatest. One of their bloggers wrote about how to taper for your perfect race. I'm not sure there is such a thing as a perfect race, but perhaps it would be helpful to pursue a perfect taper. And maybe that's not possible, but maybe that would get us close to having a successful, optimal taper might be a better way to put it. So what I would say on tapering, I have 10 tips that I published today in my blog post. So feel free to read those, but I'm going to go through them briefly. And then I'm going to explain what happened to me over the weekend that caused me to adjust my tapering plan. I'm running the Run Laughlin half marathon on Saturday in Nevada and Arizona. And so that required me to build up, have a build-up phase, to work up to the height of my training. And then the last 2 or 3 weeks before a half marathon, there's a taper period where you cut back in your mileage, you cut back on the intensity, you ramp it down. It's the descending staircase. You have the ascending staircase as the build-up phase of your training, and you have the descending staircase at the end. And you want to have the descending staircase sharp and steep enough that you go into that race with full of energy, ready to perform, and to be maximally prepared for peak performance. So what happened? I will go ahead and tell you what happened this weekend because it relates directly to the blog post and forced me to adjust my tapering plan and inspired this blog post topic. I was preparing to run with my dog. We have a 10-month-old English setter named Misty, and we were walking down my parents' rocky driveway, and I had Misty on the leash, and it was snowy and icy. I didn't realize how icy it was. And I should have been walking in the grass instead of on the rocks. And Misty pulled suddenly on the leash, and I slipped and fell, landed on my back, kind of rolled onto my ribs. So suddenly, I felt a sharp pain. I wasn't sure exactly. At first I was afraid it might be a broken ribs or something like that. But I don't think it's proven to be quite that serious. But it is affecting my range of motion. It's affecting my breathing a little bit, not constantly, but a little bit. So I've significantly cut back on how much running I'm planning on doing before this race because I want to be well rested. I want to get my arms so I can have a normal range of motion and to allow my lungs to recover. And it's a particular concern to me with landing on your ribs. If you have asthma, you're more susceptible to certain lung things occurring that maybe others are not. Your lungs can deflate if there's a sharp injury. So hopefully that has not occurred, but it is limiting my breathing a little bit to the extent that I'd rather be well rested and allow my lungs to recover from falling too. So what do we do if we taper? We have to look at several different ways that we taper, ways that we integrate it, and how we adjust it when needed. And there's a nutritional element also. We can't eat with abandon in the taper phase, or we end up too heavy at the starting line, and then you don't have an optimal performance. So the first tip that I have in the blog post is number one, to reduce your mileage. You have to reduce your mileage taper phase. And in the blog post, I suggested if you're training for a marathon, for example, you could do 70% of your normal mileage 3 weeks out, 50% 2 weeks out, and 30% of your normal mileage the week before. The training we received from the Roadrunners Club of America, I am a certified running coach, the RRCA, and they recommended for a marathon taper a 60% of your normal mileage 2 weeks out and 30% the week before. So the recommendations I put in my blog post are basically in line with the RRCA recommendations, but it's kind of wrapping, mine's a little bit steeper taper, going to 50% instead of 60. If you're not feeling as good, or you're injured, or you're sick, you want to take rest days and cut back the mileage and intensity, take more walk breaks, etc. So you can adjust the mileage accordingly, either with a 60-30% descending staircase, or the 70-50-30. This allows you to get to the race well rested, full of energy, as well prepared as you can. Obviously, we don't have control over everything, and the taper numbers that I talked about, if the greatest article, for example, that I cited, they're saying that there's science suggesting that a taper of 90%, tapering 90% of your mileage out shortly before a race can, in some cases, produce dramatic benefits. And if someone's battling a chronic injury or illness or something like that, I can see cases where that might be a good idea if you're trying to get your strength back, your health, and get your speed back. Sometimes that takes a little while if you're not feeling as well, or if you have an injury. You need to allow those body parts to heal that you're struggling with, or the body parts that are plaguing you. So that's the first tip. Reduce your mileage, either 60-30 or 70-50-30, the descending staircase. Number two, reduce the intensity. We as runners, especially serious runners, are very good at going out too fast, too hard, too long. It's as if we're trying to impress someone other than just ourselves, which, of course, some of us are. We're trying to impress our family members sometimes, or our friends. A lot of runners have social components to their training. Strava is connected to a lot of us with our training runs, or Garmin Connect. We don't want our friends to think that we're slacking off their runs. But of course, we're tapering. We need to bend that and be a little bit contrarian and say, well, I don't care what my friends or family say. I'm going to reduce my intensity so I'm well rested to have an optimal maximum effort race. So if you come back in the intensity, there are a couple of different ways to measure that. For example, you probably shouldn't be doing major speed work the week before the race. Another indicator, if you use a heart rate monitor, and I use one sometimes, I know the Maffetone method of measuring your heart rate. I know my Maffetone MAFRUN zone for zone 2 of heart rate is about 13 to 14 minute miles roughly, is about what it takes for me to keep my heart rate at zone 2. So I know if I'm running that I'm probably in my correct MAF zone, even if I'm not wearing a heart rate monitor. So for example, today with snow and ice, more snow than ice today, but the point is I had to be careful because of the weather also. And so to reduce the intensity, I decided, well, I'm going to run in my MAF zone 2 and try to keep that intensity dialed down so I don't go into this race on Saturday tired, exhausted, and just not having any energy left to achieve a personal record or anything like that. So number 2, reduce your intensity. That adds on to reduce mileage, the first recommendation. Number 3, alter the plan and be flexible, especially if you have an injury situation. Now, a lot of people will have different types of injuries will flare up shortly before a race. Sometimes you might be doing speed work. You may put too much juice into it and find you've got a strained muscle, a calf muscle or hamstring or something like that. And so it's good to really look at what that injury is, how severe it is, assess whether it's a strain or something more serious, and dial back on the on your taper plan, adjust it downward. Basically, this is just trying to be on the safe side. It's better to be cautious with something like that. So make sure you're altering that plan and being flexible to the extent that you can. Things will come up injury-wise that we can't anticipate. Falls are especially a problem with runners. A lot of falls. For example, with me, I fell on my back, rolled onto my ribs. The president of the U.S. Run Streak Association fell in a marathon recently and fell on his face, had a concussion, and got up, walked to the finish, still qualified for the Boston Marathon. Now, different runners would have done different things in that situation. A lot of us may have decided to take the DNF, the did not finish, and be on the safe side. But this individual was decided he wanted to finish the race. He was very close to the finish when he fell, but he had serious facial lacerations. And so we really have to look at, if you have an injury situation, you really want to, something like that, you want to be checked out by a doctor and assess whether you have a concussion or not. There's medical staff in the race course. Find out what they think. If you get a diagnosis like that and they instruct you to stop or not finish, really think about obeying that. I know a lot of us as runners, we think that doctors are the enemy and all that, and that's really not the case. Doctors are there to help us. Medical staff that is volunteering for a race like that, we really should listen to what they're telling us about an injury and adjust accordingly, so we're not causing further injury or risking further injury. And with a concussion in particular, if you have one, it raises significantly the risk of having a future concussion. There's just a recurrence effect. It seems to recur with a lot of people, where otherwise, if you haven't had one, you're a little bit less likely to have one unless you happen to fall and collide with the ground in some respect. So that's number 3. Number 4 is to be flexible with the weather, your schedule, your family. A lot of families have a lot of activities going on this time of year. We have dance rehearsals. My daughter's rehearsing for the Nutcracker. There's a school play, just all kinds of things going on. And so we really have to be flexible with weather conditions and make sure that we're adjusting accordingly. If it's snowy and icy, run in the treadmill or cross train, jump in the pool, do something like that instead. Don't risk life and limb just to say that you ran outside. This is difficult for us that like to run outdoors in particular. And I do have a treadmill. I haven't been using it much lately, but with the weather conditions we've been having in Nebraska with more snow and ice, I'm going to have to run on the treadmill sometimes. I just have to figure out what to do with the dog because I'm not taking the dog in the treadmill. I can always put the dog in the kennel or something like that. But so number 4 of the recommendations was to adjust and be flexible for the weather and your schedule. Number 5. Err on the side of caution. It's better to be slightly undertrained, very close to a race, than to overtrain and not have enough energy left to achieve a good result. This sounds a little bit strange because we as runners are. It seems to be a little bit of a foreign concept to think of what you can do with undertraining. If you're talking about the build phase of training, that makes sense. It's the build phase is not really a phase that you want to be under training in. If there's any portion of training that you can under train in and get away with it and have it help you result wise, it would be the taper phase, the 1 to 3 weeks before a race. And let me explain. If you're training for a full marathon, the regular taper period is probably between 1 to 3 weeks, depending on how you feel. I had previously done 2-week tapers in a lot of cases, and in many cases that was enough. But back in May of this year, when I looked at how much running I'd been doing and how tough some of the weeks were that I ran many more miles than I anticipated, I determined that as a run streaker, I needed to cut back, do a 3-week taper instead of 2, and that worked. And I think the last week I only ran like 1 mile runs pretty much almost every day the week before the race, and that produced an amazing result. It helped produce the fastest full marathon I've run since 2004. So really look at the possibility of undertraining, what it can do for you at the end, the very end of your training cycle, the taper phase. That's really where undertraining can be helpful. And again, don't go crazy. I wouldn't say you can go weeks without running and have a great result at the end of a taper, unless you're ill or you have injury. I mean, then you do have to try to respect those and adjust for those other factors. Number 6 in the recommendations is to check in daily with your body, rest if needed, to listen to your body. And sometimes we have something flares up in the middle of our run or training run, and sometimes we pay attention to it and sometimes we don't. And when we fail to pay attention to it, it tends to come back. A good example would be if you strain your calf by perhaps running too fast at the very end of your run. I've done this more than once. That will flare up, and suddenly you'll be limping at the end, and you wonder, what in the world did I do to myself? Now, if you fail to deal with that and fail to adjust for that kind of overexertion when you run again, you're just going to be further aggravating that injury. And sometimes perhaps a mild calf strain, you can tape over it with KT tape, with kinesiology tape, to stabilize that muscle, keep it in place, not allow it to move around or tense up by being overextended further, if that's really what happened. But there's a strong temptation at the end of the run sometimes to go full throttle and get your body used to that kind of effort in short spurts. Sometimes it's not best to do that at the very end of your training run. And sometimes it's kind of fun. Sometimes you can race your friends or family, your dog at the end of your run, and make it a little more exciting. But be careful. Don't overdo it. Don't cause injury by going too far, hyperextending your muscles. Number 7, cross-train and do extra stretching in the 1 to 3 weeks before your race. I would give the examples of swimming as cross-training. You have weights, but I wouldn't overdo that in the 1 to 3 weeks before the end of the taper. Tai Chi is good. You have medicine balls and foam rollers. Roll out those stiff muscles. If your back is stiff, roll it on the medicine balls. Roll your back in the foam roller. Get that loose again. Try to get it stretched out. It's better to get it stretched out now than to be at the starting line and realize you really should have used that foam roller more, or you should have gotten the medicine balls out and rolled out your back pain or other muscle pain. You can roll out your legs, your feet. You can roll out your feet with foam rollers. Also remember to use ice if you have sore muscles or joints. The whirlpool is helpful sometimes, but I wouldn't overdo that. You've got to be careful with being in the whirlpool too much or too long. And I don't know, some people like to go back and forth between the pool and the whirlpool, and radical sudden changes in temperature, that might be interesting in winter. I guess we're going into winter here for some folks. Sometimes the whirlpools could at least warm up, but if you're much, sometimes better to deal with that with the foam roller and ice than necessarily the whirlpool, although the whirlpool has a therapeutic effect as long as you're careful with it and you're not overusing it. Let's see, number 8, sleep and relaxation. We like to, we as runners sometimes have trouble with this one in particular. The sleep and rest part of tapering is extremely difficult because what happens is we sit down, we start thinking about the race, we start visualizing the race, and we get nervous and we think about what if this happens, what if this goes wrong, and it's good to anticipate a lot of those unexpected things that can come up, but it's not good to dwell on them to such an extent that they dominate our thoughts and become just frenetic worries that we can't resolve or take care of. We have to be able to deal with rest and relaxation. And so for myself, I deal with, I use Tai Chi, meditation. Tai Chi's been particularly helpful in helping me get focused more on the present moment and not so much on race day anxiety and, worrying about whatever pain or niggle that you might have at the last minute in the taper phase. A lot of people talk about the pre-race niggle, the thing that comes up that you're not expecting, and suddenly you're become preoccupied with that. And the more you think about it, the more you can make that worse. So really the Tai Chi is very helpful. Some of the Tai Chi exercises you can do with a foam roller. And if you're using a foam roller with them, it's reminding you that after you're done with Tai Chi, you're going to roll out those muscles with the foam roller. And so those two can reinforce each other. Meditation is helpful. It just, we all need to purge our minds of fear, worries, anxiety, just things that we shouldn't have to worry about. But we need to focus on where we are and really figure out ways to let go of that anxiety and worry and focus on positive thinking, positive visualization of what can go right and how we can make our ideal race experience happen. And a lot of that happens with visualization. And I do a lot of visualization with the race, especially the week before the race, and in particular, the night before the race. I try to visualize the race in its entirety. Think of anything that could go wrong, but then think of what I will do to deal with that if it happens. And I think that's something that we as runners, we forget about. We worry about what can go wrong, but we forget the problem-solving part of it. And if we forget the problem-solving part of it, then we haven't processed these things in our brain, and when we're confronted with them in a race, then it just tends to get us more nervous or more anxious about how to deal with it, or you don't want to be worrying about an injury that could occur during a race if in all likelihood it's perhaps not going to happen anyway. And of course, the shorter race, you have less anxiety. For example, a half marathon should not cause as much anxiety for most of us as a full marathon. And ultra marathons, there's just more stress, more things that can go wrong. Longer race, more exposure to the elements, and the elements are a particular concern this time of year. You have high winds, snow, ice, just all kinds of things that you might not anticipate that you might face. And that's regardless of where you're racing. In fact, we've already been warned by the race officials in Run Laughlin in Laughlin, Nevada, and it's Bullhead City, Arizona. It's very confusing, but the race goes back and forth between two states in a half marathon period. So the Run Laughlin folks have told us you need to prepare for high winds. There could be high winds in the race, and the weather forecast suggests pretty good weather weather in the temperatures in the 50s, but the wind could be an issue. And if the wind's at your back, that's not so a big a deal. But if it's in your face, you have to figure out how to keep dust and things like that out of your eyes. And sometimes you get rocks flying, depending on where you're running, other objects. So maybe we'll see tumbleweeds flying at us on the course. I don't know. I've never seen the course other than by the computer animation and some of the pictures and movies that they've done of the race course. So those are a couple ideas on how to deal with the sleep and relaxation part. The night before a race, it's really tough to sleep. If it's a full marathon and we put all this stress on ourselves and we try to picture anything that can happen, sometimes we get caught up in, perhaps the worst marathon that we ever had. And I did have one marathon that I dropped out of. I had gastrointestinal problems at mile 21 of a Lincoln Marathon one year. So I dropped out. But I try not to think about that. I use that as fuel for propelling me to stronger performances now. I've learned a lot from that race, and I've tried to implement those changes in my training now, and to just to really approach races as with more of a go with the flow type of attitude. And I think if we do that, we're just going to achieve better results. And I think we can do that with life too. If we start going with the flow and not overreacting to issues as they arise, whether it's injuries, illness, things of that nature, probably the things that plague runners the most, that's really helpful. So, and keeping your eyes closed and just being in bed, I mean, that's still, it's not exactly sleep, but it's better than nothing. I mean, it's better than sitting up or walking around, and our bodies all need to be in that inert state for a while in order to have the restful healing of our bodies and minds that we need on a daily basis. So, don't worry if sometimes I've had some races where I haven't slept well the night before, but I had a fantastic race performance. And I think some of it is just, yes, there was pre-race anxiety for whatever reason, and somehow I was able to work through that. Obviously, if you're younger, that's easier to do. You just have a better, you have more strength and energy, generally speaking. Although as we get older, there are things we can do to still maximize our performance. And so, try to sleep as best you can. If you can't sleep much, don't worry about it. Just keep your eyes closed. Try to, unplug from technology and all that. Don't get caught up with, reading about the race in the middle of the night because you can't sleep. That's not going to be helpful. In fact, just the light from your electronic device the night before the race, be careful about unplugging early and getting extra rest, maybe trying to get an extra hour of sleep or a couple hours, or napping the day before too. That can be helpful in just helping keep our body in more of a relaxed, restful state, and not a state of feeling like we have to be in perpetual motion the night before a race. That's not productive and helpful. Let's see, number 9. I am suggesting cutting back to 1 run per day the week before a race. And I've had to do this myself. I should explain with our dog, a lot of times I'll take her out running first for a run of a mile or more, and then I'll bring her back in the house, and then I'll go finish my second run, sometimes third run, sometimes fourth run. And I'm noticing that sometimes the more of those slices that I stack up, it makes me more exhausted. And so I'm trying to get back to more like 1 to 2 runs a day, but I've gone more than a week just running 1 run a day. And part of that is with travel for Thanksgiving, I didn't have as much time. I was the primary caretaker of our dog for most of the weekend. And then after slipping on the snow and ice, I wasn't going to risk going out for a second run if I'm feeling so tired and winded from just running a mile. So it didn't make sense to stack for the run. So I think Jeff Galloway and others have recommended for runners over 40 that it's good to put these runs in slices of 2 or maybe 2, to take your run, bifurcate it or bisect it into 2 portions, and essentially run one, rest, and then run the other one, or run one in the morning, run one in the evening. For a lot of people that work during the day, some people like to run a short run in the morning and a long run in the evening, or vice versa, depending on how your work hours are. But I think during the taper phase, it's good to really cut back on how many runs you're doing and maybe get it to 1 per day. I think that might be ideal. I haven't seen a lot of science on this. I would be interested to check this out with some other runners, coaches, Runner's World, and perhaps the Road Runners Club of America. Perhaps they have some materials on this. I'd have to look, but I didn't see anything in my certification paperwork talking about how many runs per day. But that's something really with the taper phase. You want to do your last big workout 7 to 10 days before the race, and your last demanding long run should be 2 to 3 weeks before the race. Now, if you're an elite athlete, you're going to bend that a little bit. Elite athletes can go a little bit later than that with their most intensity or their last big workout. But for most of us, those are good rules of thumb to obey, and I think that's helpful. It makes a big difference to cut back in all these different ways, and that's why I'm going through all the different ways that I can think of in cutting back and doing so in an intelligent manner, being conservative about how much you're running and with how much intensity this close to a race. Number 10, stay off your feet the week before the race as much as possible. Walking probably doesn't count. A lot of running coaches and other runners who coach folks are warning about the pre-race expo. We do all this walking around, you're shopping, and sometimes that you can do too much. You can overdo it, and suddenly you stack that on top of whatever running you did that day. And some people get more tired if they're exerting themselves by being on their feet too much. So you want to make sure, especially the day before, you want to stay off your feet as much as possible. So this conflicts a little bit with the advice of being active, moving. As a Move It Monday ambassador, we try to encourage people to move and exercise on Mondays in particular, knowing that endurance athletes that we run long on Saturday and Sundays usually, or one of the two, or both. And so on Monday, trying to still make that be some kind of workout, even if it's a 1 mile run, that would still be sufficient to count and to have some type of workout. So, that way you're keeping the momentum going and you're keeping it steady. You're not having this roller coaster effect of, I'm having these, and I take Monday off, which makes me more likely to take Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday off. And, don't get me wrong, if you're injured or ill, it makes sense to take the time off, especially in the taper phase. So, but remember to stay off your feet close to the race, especially the week before, in particular the night before. And I would say that the day of the race, you still need to warm up your legs and do some warming up, slow jogging, very slow running, maybe a couple strides, that kind of thing. But you don't want to go crazy with that either. You want to still have enough energy left in the tank to finish the race, to do as best as you can, and to accept that, that your training will work. If we trust the training plan and adjust it accordingly when it's needed, and to be really flexible when we need to be in the ways that we've talked about. So I do want to thank Mark Lloyd Z for joining, and I can't remember if I welcomed James or not, so wanted to welcome them. And I know Ha Tran popped in for a while, so thank you all for joining us. Appreciate your support today. The tapering And yes, and Tony, I think I welcomed you earlier. If I didn't, I apologize. I've tried to welcome everybody as they come. But hopefully this gives you, if you read the blog posts that I've given and go through the top 10 tips, I think that gives you a pretty good base to work from. And, feel free to modify that if needed. Some of us are having better weather conditions than others, so you might not have to make the kind of modifications I'm talking about. Some are dealing with, heat and humidity still this time of year. So you need to still make the seasonal adjustments to those plans for whatever conditions you're dealing with. And, make sure that you take tapering seriously. There's talk of taper madness and taper tantrums and things like that. It's a very difficult thing for runners who are serious with the ascending build phase that we have to descend carefully, cautiously, intelligently, and leave ourselves with enough energy in the tank to have an optimal race. But if you're smart about it and you look at your plan and you get it flexible enough to fit your life and your schedule, and practical enough and not inflated by irrational expectations. We want to be realistic in the expectations we have for race day. We all should have a goal. They should have a goal to finish well, to do well. And one of the big things with tapering is to make sure that you cut back in all these ways that we talked about, that you also cut back on how much you're eating, so that you're not arriving at race day with more freight than you want, and to make sure that you hydrate and that you do that continuously, and that you have a hydration plan and nutrition plan for the day of the race that doesn't deviate from anything that you've tested before. Anything you do on race day should be something that you've tried in practice. You don't want to be making things up on the fly unless you're an elite athlete and you have the necessity of doing that and the basis for doing that that's supported by strong running experience and or coaching. So I'm happy to answer any tapering questions if anyone has any. I'm going to unlock the seat at this time. I want to thank all of you for joining us. And if anyone has questions, please let me know. I'd be happy to talk about tapering or other running issues. Happy to customize running plans, help you deal with any issues, concerns, problems that you're having. And I'm happy to talk about running injuries, having just had one, and trying to figure out how to modify your running plan to make sure that you're going to have optimal performance on race day. Just do the best you can, accept where you are, be flexible, and do your best. You'll have a great race. So everybody have a good day. I want to wish you a happy Move It Monday. Thanks for joining me, and goodbye. This is Jeremy Murphy signing off from Lincoln, Nebraska. Have a great day. Bye.